He was about to propose when the billionaire saw his ex-wife at a bus stop with Triplets. The velvet ring box felt heavy in Jackson Harrington's pocket as his Bentley glided through Manhattan's rain-slicked streets. Tonight was the night. After 18 months of a perfectly calibrated relationship with Vivian Chase, Harvard MBA, senator's daughter, the ideal CEO's wife, he was finally going to propose at Cirque. Then the traffic light turned red at 57th Street. Jackson glanced impatiently out the window, and his entire world stopped. There, huddled under the bus shelter, stood Amelia, his ex-wife. Her hair was different now, shorter with strands of silver he didn't remember. She wore a practical navy raincoat, nothing like the designer clothes he'd once insisted she wear. But what made his heart slam against his ribs weren't these changes. It was the 3 identical boys in red raincoats clustered around her legs. 3 boys with his eyes, his mother's chin, his father's hairline. "Sir, we've arrived at Cirque," his driver announced. But Jackson couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't tear his gaze away from the impossible truth standing 20 feet away in the rain. Have you ever had a single moment completely shatter the life you thought you wanted? Have you ever discovered that what you threw away was actually your greatest treasure? Tonight, Jackson Harrington was about to propose to the perfect woman. Until he saw the family he never knew he had standing in the rain. What would you do if you discovered you had 3 children you never knew existed? And can 2 people who once broke each other's hearts find their way back to love after everything that's happened between them? "Stop the car," Jackson ordered, his voice barely recognizable even to himself. "Pull over, right now." His driver, Thomas, glanced in the rearview mirror with concern. "Sir, is everything all right?" But Jackson was already opening the door, stepping out into the rain without his umbrella, heedless of the water soaking his bespoke Tom Ford suit. He moved as if in a trance, weaving between irritated pedestrians, his eyes never leaving Amelia and the 3 boys clustered around her. One of the boys spotted him first, tugging at Amelia's coat and pointing. She looked up, and the color drained from her face as their eyes met across the crowded sidewalk. "Jackson," she breathed, the word barely audible over the city noise. He stopped a few feet away, suddenly uncertain. What was he doing? What could he possibly say after 6 years of silence? After the divorce papers delivered by courier, the settlement negotiated through attorneys, the clean break that had been his idea? "Amelia," he managed. How are you?" She recovered quickly, straightening her shoulders in that determined way he once admired, pulling the boys closer to her sides. "I'm fine. Excuse me, but our bus." "Who's that, Mommy?" asked one of the boys, tugging at her coat. She knelt down, gathering them close. "This is an old friend of mine, Mr. Harrington." "He has eyes like us," observed another boy, his head tilted thoughtfully. The 3rd boy stared at Jackson with open curiosity, then held up his paper craft. "I made a rocket ship. Do you like rocket ships?" Yes," Jackson replied, his throat tight with emotion. "I do." "Amelia," he said, turning back to her, his voice urgent now. "These boys, are they?" "Jackson, this isn't the place," a woman interrupted, stepping forward protectively. Jackson recognized her immediately, Meredith, Amelia's younger sister, who had never approved of him even in the best days of their marriage. "Amelia, the bus is coming," Meredith continued. "We should go." The bus pulled up with a hydraulic hiss, doors opening. Meredith quickly gathered a small shopping cart and urged the boys toward the bus. "Please," Jackson said, his voice cracking slightly. "Let me drive you home. We need to talk about this." Amelia hesitated, looking at the crowded bus, then at the rain still falling steadily. Meredith shook her head in warning from the bus steps. "Just a ride," Jackson pressed. "My driver is right there. Please, Amelia." Perhaps it was the genuine shock in his voice, or the practical reality of managing 3 energetic boys on a packed bus during rush hour. Whatever the reason, Amelia finally nodded. "Just a ride," she agreed. "Mare will take a car. I'll call you later." Meredith looked deeply skeptical but nodded, stepping off the bus with the boys and the shopping cart. "If you're sure." "I'm sure," Amelia said, though her voice suggested otherwise. The walk to the waiting Bentley was silent and tense. Thomas showed no surprise at the unexpected passengers, simply holding doors and helping with the shopping cart with professional efficiency. Inside the car's plush interior, the triplets' excitement momentarily overcame the adults' discomfort. "Wow, this car is huge. Look at these buttons. Can I press one? Please." "Boys," Amelia said firmly, "remember our manners in other people's spaces." They settled immediately, though their eyes continued to roam the car's luxurious features. Jackson couldn't stop staring at them. Now that they were closer, the resemblance was undeniable. They had his mother's chin, his father's hairline. Harrington's through and through. His sons. He had 3 sons he'd never known existed. 7 years earlier, Jackson Harrington had been a different man. Not yet a billionaire, though well on his way with his cybersecurity startup gaining serious traction. He'd been 34, driven, ambitious, and utterly unprepared for Amelia Bennett to walk into his life at a charity gala for the New York Public Library. She hadn't been like the women he usually dated. Sleek, polished socialites or razor-sharp businesswomen who understood the game he was playing. Amelia had been a literature professor at Columbia, more comfortable discussing Austen and Eliot than market shares and venture capital. She'd worn a simple black dress that night, her dark hair falling in natural waves around her shoulders. No expensive jewelry, just a vintage brooch that had belonged to her grandmother. "You look lost," she'd said, finding him hiding in the library's rare book room, seeking a moment's escape from the networking and small talk. "Just taking a breather," he'd admitted. "These events can be exhausting," she'd offered with a knowing smile. "All that performing." He'd been startled by her perception. "Most people think I enjoy this." "Maybe you do sometimes," she'd said, running her fingers along the spine of a first edition Dickens. "But tonight you looked like a man who needed a moment of quiet." They talked for an hour, missing the keynote speech entirely. She'd challenged him, made him laugh, listened with genuine interest to his vision for Sentinel security. By the end of the night, he'd been captivated by her quiet intelligence, her unpretentious warmth, the way she saw through the carefully constructed facade he presented to the world. Their courtship had been swift and intense. Amelia had been a revelation to Jackson, someone who valued him for more than his growing success, who reminded him of the idealistic young man he'd been before ambition began to consume him. Within 6 months, he'd proposed on a quiet evening at her small apartment. No grand gestures, just the two of them and the promise of a future together. "Where to, miss?" Thomas asked now, glancing in the rearview mirror, pulling Jackson sharply back to the present. "Blackwood," Amelia supplied. "Amelia Blackwood. We're in Queens, Sunnyside, corner of 43rd and Skillman." Jackson raised an eyebrow at the unfamiliar surname but said nothing as Thomas programmed the address and pulled smoothly into traffic. "So," he said finally, when the silence became unbearable, "are you going to introduce me properly?" Amelia's expression remained guarded, but she nodded. "Boys, this is Mr. Jackson Harrington. Jackson, these are my sons. Ethan is the one with the dinosaur. Oliver made the rocket ship. And this is Leo with the portrait." "It's you, Mom," Leo clarified, holding up the drawing again. "See? I gave you a big smile because tomorrow's our birthday and you said we're having cake." "It's beautiful," Jackson said softly, earning a beaming smile from the boy. "Do you like dinosaurs, Mr. Harrington?" Ethan asked, scooting closer to show his paper creation. "I do," Jackson replied, his throat tight. "T-Rex was always my favorite." "Mine too." Ethan's eyes widened with delight. "Mom says they had tiny arms but big hearts." "Your mom always did see the best in everyone," Jackson said, glancing at Amelia, who was watching the interaction with an unreadable expression. The drive to Queens took nearly an hour in the evening traffic. By the time they arrived at Amelia's modest apartment building, Jackson had learned that Ethan loved dinosaurs and building blocks, Oliver was fascinated by space and could name all the planets, and Leo was the artist of the family, always drawing and noticing small details others missed. They were in pre-kindergarten at a local school, loved the library where their mom worked, and were very excited about turning 5 tomorrow. What he hadn't learned was why Amelia had kept their existence from him for 5 years. "This is us," Amelia said as Thomas pulled up to the curb. "Thank you for the ride." "Amelia, we need to talk," Jackson said quietly. "Please." She hesitated, then nodded once. "Boys, go with Aunt Meredith. She'll get you started on dinner. I need to talk to Mr. Harrington for a few minutes." Meredith, who had been waiting on the building steps, approached the car with obvious reluctance. "Everything okay?" she asked, her protective gaze fixed on Jackson. "Fine, Mare. Just give us a few minutes." Once the boys had been ushered inside with the shopping cart, Amelia turned to Jackson. "You should know I never kept them from you out of spite. I tried to tell you in the beginning." "When?" he demanded, the shock giving way to anger. "How? I never received any message, any call. I called your office 3 times in the first month after I found out," she said evenly. "The first time your assistant said you were in meetings all day. The second time you were in Tokyo. The third time, I was told you had left explicit instructions not to be disturbed by personal calls, especially from me." Jackson winced, remembering that directive. In the raw aftermath of the divorce, he'd wanted a clean break. No messy emotional entanglements to distract from the critical funding round Sentinel was pursuing. "After that," Amelia continued, "I sent a letter to your office. It was returned unopened, marked refused. So I stopped trying." "A letter?" Jackson ran a hand through his hair. "Amelia, you were pregnant with my children. That warranted more than a letter. What would you have had me do, Jackson? Camp outside your office? Create a scene at one of your investor meetings?" Her calm finally cracked, revealing the hurt beneath. "You made it abundantly clear that I was an impediment to your success, that our marriage was holding you back. What was I supposed to think when you refused even basic communication?" He had no answer for that. She was right. In his single-minded pursuit of Sentinel's growth, he had systematically cut every tie to his previous life, including her. "I had just found out I was carrying triplets," she said more softly. "High-risk pregnancy, no husband, no job since I'd left my position to support your career. I had to focus on keeping them safe, keeping myself healthy. Fighting my way past your gatekeepers wasn't an option. If you've ever had a moment that changed everything in the blink of an eye, hit that like button right now." The first year of their marriage had been a dream. Jackson had been riding the wave of Sentinel's early success, and Amelia had been his anchor, his safe harbor from the stress and pressure. They'd bought a brownstone in Brooklyn, not yet ready for Manhattan's glittering towers. On weekends, they'd explored the city's hidden corners, discovering tiny bookshops and hole-in-the-wall restaurants. At night, they'd talk for hours about everything and nothing. His vision for Sentinel, her passion for literature, their hopes for the future. But as Sentinel grew, so did the demands on Jackson's time. 18-hour days became the norm. Weekends disappeared into meetings and business trips. The intimate conversations that had been the foundation of their relationship grew shorter, more perfunctory, until they barely talked at all. "You're never here anymore?" Amelia had said one night, after he'd missed her department's faculty dinner. The third such event he'd promised to attend and then canceled at the last minute. "I'm building something important," he'd replied, not looking up from his laptop. "This next round of funding could take Sentinel to the next level." "And what about us? What level are we at, Jackson?" He'd finally looked up then, irritated by the interruption. "What does that mean?" "It means I feel like I'm living alone. It means I can't remember the last time we had a real conversation. It means I miss my husband." "I'm right here," he'd said, gesturing around their living room. "I come home every night. Your body comes home. Your mind is still at the office." Amelia had sat beside him, closing his laptop gently. "Jackson, I'm not asking you to give up your dreams. I'm just asking for a place in them." He'd promised to do better, and for a while he had tried. But then Sentinel had landed its first major government contract, and the demands had intensified. Jackson had been consumed by the opportunity, the validation, the intoxicating rush of success within reach. The real turning point had come when Sentinel outgrew the Brooklyn office. Jackson had decided to move the company to Manhattan, and with it, their home. "I found us a penthouse on Park Avenue," he'd announced one evening, presenting Amelia with glossy brochures of a sleek, ultramodern apartment with panoramic views of the city. "You found us?" she'd questioned. "Don't you mean you decided for us?" "You'll love it," he'd insisted. "It's closer to everything, and we need to project the right image now. Sentinel is playing in the big leagues. And what about my job? Columbia is a long commute from Park Avenue." Jackson had waved this concern away. "You don't need to work anymore. We can afford for you to take time off, maybe focus on our social obligations. The wife of a CEO has certain responsibilities." The hurt in her eyes should have warned him, but he'd been too blinded by his vision of their future. His future to see it. "I love teaching," she'd said quietly. "It's not about the money. It's who I am." But Jackson had already moved on to showing her the amenities of their new building, the prestigious address, the status it would confer. He hadn't noticed how silent she'd become, how something had shifted between them. They'd moved to the penthouse a month later. Amelia had resigned from Columbia, a decision Jackson had celebrated as her finally embracing their new life. He hadn't recognized it for what it truly was, the beginning of her disappearance. Now, sitting in his Bentley outside her modest Queens apartment, Jackson faced the consequences of his blindness. "So you changed your name? Disappeared?" he asked, the anger in his voice masking his guilt. "I went back to my mother's maiden name, yes. It seemed simpler, and I didn't disappear. I moved in with Meredith until the boys were born, then found a job in this apartment. I've been right here, living my life, raising our sons. Without child support, without help. It wasn't a question." Amelia shrugged. "We've managed. The boys are happy, healthy, loved. That's what matters." Jackson looked out at the modest apartment building, thinking of the worn raincoat, the careful way she protected those stuffed elephants in the shopping cart. All while he lived in a penthouse, flew private, and spent more on watches than she probably earned in a year. "I want to meet them properly," he said finally. "Not as a stranger in a car, but as their father." Amelia's expression turned wary. "Jackson, you can't just walk into their lives and then disappear when it becomes inconvenient. They're children, not business acquisitions." The barb stung because it contained a kernel of truth. How many projects had he enthusiastically started, only to abandon when a more promising opportunity arose? "I know I have no right to ask this," he said carefully, "but please give me a chance. They're my sons too." Amelia studied him for a long moment, searching his face for something. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she finally nodded. "Their birthday party is tomorrow afternoon at 4. Nothing fancy, just cake and games at the apartment. You can come meet them properly. After that, we'll see." "Thank you," he said, relief washing through him. "I'll be there." She opened the car door, then paused. "Jackson? That woman you're seeing, the investment banker? Vivian?" He blinked, surprised she knew about Vivian. "How did you?" "The Wall Street Journal Society pages. You two have been photographed at several events." She smiled faintly at his confusion. "I still read the business section. Old habits." Jackson suddenly remembered the ring in his pocket, the reservation at Le Cirque, the proposal he'd been en route to plan when the world tilted on its axis. "I should go," Amelia said, stepping out of the car. "The boys need dinner, and I need to finish wrapping their presents." "Amelia," he called as she turned to leave. "Thank you for raising them so well. They're amazing." Something softened in her expression. "They are. Good night, Jackson." As the car pulled away, Jackson sat in stunned silence, the weight of the evening's revelations pressing on him. He had 3 sons. 3 boys who shared his blood, his name, or should have, his legacy. Boys who were turning 5 tomorrow, who had lived their entire lives without knowing their father. And in his pocket, a ring meant for a woman who knew nothing about any of this. "Thomas," he said finally, "take me home. I need to make some calls." The final months of their marriage had unraveled with stunning speed. Amelia had grown increasingly quiet, retreating into herself as Jackson pushed her to become the corporate wife he thought he needed. Attending charity galas on his arm, hosting dinner parties for potential investors, always perfectly dressed, perfectly poised, perfectly silent. The breaking point had come during a dinner with Sentinel's board of directors. One of the board members had asked Amelia about her thoughts on a recent bestseller, and she'd launched into a passionate analysis of the book's themes. Jackson had cut her off mid-sentence, redirecting the conversation to Sentinel's latest security protocol. Later that night, in the pristine silence of their penthouse, she'd confronted him. "You embarrassed me tonight," she'd said, her voice steady despite the hurt in her eyes. "I saved you from embarrassing yourself," he'd corrected. No one wanted to hear a lecture on contemporary literature. "He asked for my opinion, Jackson. He was interested. He was being polite. This is business, Amelia. Everything is business. Even our marriage?" she'd asked quietly. The question had caught him off guard. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I don't recognize us anymore. It means I've become an accessory to your success, not a partner in your life." "That's ridiculous," he'd dismissed. "You have everything you could possibly want. Except you," she'd said simply. "Except the man I married." "I'm the same man," he'd insisted. "Just more successful." "No," she'd said with a sad certainty that should have alarmed him. "The man I married saw me. You look right through me." 2 weeks later, he'd come home to find her gone. A letter on the kitchen counter explaining that she couldn't live as a ghost in her own life anymore. She needed space to remember who she was. Jackson had been furious, then coldly pragmatic. He called his lawyer that night and initiated divorce proceedings. If she wanted out, he'd make it clean, quick, final. No messy emotions, no drawn-out reconciliation attempts. Just a settlement generous enough to ensure her silence and his freedom to focus entirely on Sentinel's explosive growth. He'd never asked where she went. He'd never tried to call. He'd simply moved forward, as he always did, eyes fixed firmly on the next horizon. Now, as Thomas drove him back to his penthouse, Jackson realized with sickening clarity what his single-minded focus had cost him. Not just a wife he'd once loved deeply, but 5 years of his sons' lives. First steps, first words, first everything gone forever. The first call was to Vivian, canceling their dinner with a vague explanation about a family emergency. The second was to his assistant, clearing his schedule for the next day. The third was to his lawyer. "Richard," he said when the attorney answered, "I need everything you can find on Amelia Blackwood, formerly Harrington. And I need to know my legal rights regarding children I've just discovered exist." As he hung up, Jackson walked to the window of his penthouse, staring out at the glittering city below. Somewhere out there, in a modest apartment in Queens, 3 boys who had his eyes were getting ready for bed, excited about their birthday tomorrow. His sons. The thought kept hitting him anew, a wave of emotion unlike anything he'd experienced in the relentless pursuit of success that had defined the last decade of his life. The ring box sat abandoned on his coffee table, the proposal forgotten. Tonight, for the first time in 6 years, Jackson Harrington wasn't thinking about Sentinel Security, or the board, or his carefully constructed future with the perfect corporate wife. He was thinking about tiny arms and big hearts, about rocket ships and dinosaurs, about a chance to be something more meaningful than a billionaire CEO. He was thinking about being a father. If you believe true love sometimes needs time apart to grow stronger, subscribe to Timeless Love Tales for more stories that honor the journey back to each other. Amelia closed the apartment door behind her and leaned against it, taking a deep breath to steady herself. Through the thin walls, she could hear the boys chattering excitedly to Meredith about their ride in the fancy car, and the man with eyes like theirs. "Mom!" Oliver called, running to her as she entered the small living room. "Can Mr. Harrington come to our birthday? He likes rockets too." Meredith shot her a questioning look over the boys' heads. Amelia managed to smile for her son. "Actually, yes. Mr. Harrington will be coming to your party tomorrow." The triplets erupted in cheers while Meredith's eyebrows rose even higher. "Boys, why don't you go wash up for dinner?" Amelia suggested. "Aunt Meredith and I need to talk for a minute." Once the boys had scampered off to the bathroom, Meredith didn't waste time. "Are you out of your mind? After everything he did? Or didn't do? You're just letting him waltz back into your lives." "He didn't know about them, Mare," Amelia said quietly. "Because he made himself unreachable. Because he threw you away like you were nothing." Meredith's protective anger was a familiar comfort, but tonight Amelia felt too drained to feed into it. "I know, but they're his sons too, and they're starting to ask questions about their father. What was I supposed to do when he was standing right in front of us?" Meredith sighed, deflating slightly. "I just don't want to see you hurt again. Or worse, see those boys hurt when he loses interest and disappears." "I won't let that happen," Amelia said with quiet determination. "This isn't about me and Jackson. It's about Ethan, Oliver, and Leo having a chance to know their father." Later that night, after the boys were asleep, Amelia sat at her small kitchen table, a cup of tea growing cold beside her as she remembered the day she discovered she was pregnant. It had been 3 weeks after she left Jackson, 2 days after receiving divorce papers from his attorney. She'd been staying with Meredith, trying to figure out her next steps, when the persistent nausea she'd attributed to stress could no longer be ignored. The shock of seeing that positive test had nearly brought her to her knees. A baby. Jackson's baby. A complication neither of them had anticipated in their clean, efficient separation. Her first instinct had been to call him immediately. Despite everything, she'd believed he had a right to know. But when she'd finally worked up the courage to call his office, his assistant had been polite but firm. Mr. Harrington was unavailable and not taking personal calls, especially from his ex-wife. She tried twice more before sending a registered letter that was returned unopened. The message couldn't have been clearer. Jackson had moved on. He wanted nothing to do with her or any remnant of their life together. The final blow had come at her 12-week appointment, when the ultrasound technician had gone quiet, then called in the doctor. Amelia had feared the worst until the doctor pointed to the screen with a smile. "Congratulations, Ms. Bennett. You're having triplets. 3 babies. 3 heartbeats. 3 tiny lives depending entirely on her." That night, she'd made her decision. If Jackson didn't want to be part of their lives, she wouldn't force the issue. She would build something new, something strong, something that didn't depend on a man who had made his priorities crystal clear. She'd legally changed her name back to her mother's maiden name, Blackwood. She'd found a job at the Queen's Public Library that offered decent health insurance. She'd moved into the small but clean apartment in a neighborhood with good schools. And when the boys were born, 3 perfect, identical miracles, she'd given them her new surname, a fresh start untainted by rejection. Now, 5 years later, Jackson Harrington had reappeared as suddenly as he'd vanished, bringing with him all the complicated emotions she'd worked so hard to put behind her. The most unsettling part wasn't seeing him again. It was realizing that despite everything, despite the hurt and the abandonment and the years of struggle, some small, traitorous part of her heart still recognized him, still remembered what it had been like to be loved by him, before ambition consumed him. "That's not who he is anymore," she reminded herself firmly. "And it's not who you are either." Tomorrow she would introduce Jackson to his sons properly. She would be civil, cordial even. But she would not forget the lessons of the past. She would not mistake his interest in the boys for interest in her. And she would not, under any circumstances, allow herself to be vulnerable to him again. The boys deserved a father, but she deserved to protect the life and the strength she'd built without him. The next morning, Jackson woke before dawn, his mind racing with plans and possibilities. His lawyer had called late the previous night with preliminary information. Amelia had legal custody of the triplets, having listed father unknown on their birth certificates. She had never sought child support or made any legal claim against him. The boys were registered as Ethan, Oliver, and Leo Blackwood at their pre-kindergarten and with their pediatrician. Legally, Jackson would need to establish paternity before pursuing any custody rights. But that wasn't his immediate concern. First, he needed to earn a place in their lives, to prove to Amelia that he could be trusted with the precious gift of knowing his sons. He spent the morning in a frenzy of activity, canceling meetings, researching child development for 5-year-olds, and most importantly, shopping for birthday presents. Not the easy way, sending an assistant with a blank check, but personally, thoughtfully. For Ethan, he found a detailed dinosaur excavation kit with real tools and a comprehensive book about prehistoric creatures. For Oliver, a high-quality telescope and a glow-in-the-dark map of the constellations for his bedroom ceiling. For Leo, a professional-grade art set with paints, pencils, and a leather-bound sketchbook embossed with his name. As an afterthought, he added a gift for Amelia. Not jewelry or anything that might be misinterpreted, but a first-edition copy of Jane Austen's Persuasion that he found at a rare bookshop in the village. It had been her favorite novel, the story of two people who found their way back to each other after years apart. He wasn't presumptuous enough to think their story would follow the same path, but he remembered how her eyes had lit up whenever she discussed Austen's work. By the time he arrived at Amelia's apartment building, his arms laden with carefully wrapped packages, Jackson felt a nervousness he hadn't experienced since his first investor pitch. This mattered more than any business deal, any acquisition, any IPO. This was his chance to meet his children, really meet them, and he was terrified of making a mistake. He hesitated outside the door, hearing children's laughter and music from within. Then, taking a deep breath, he knocked. Meredith opened the door, her expression guarded. "You came. I said I would," Jackson replied simply. She studied him for a moment, then stepped aside. "They're excited to see you. Don't disappoint them." The apartment was small but warm, decorated with colorful streamers and balloons. A homemade banner reading "Happy 5th Birthday Ethan, Oliver and Leo" stretched across one wall. A cluster of children and a few adults, presumably other parents, filled the modest living room, while the triplets held court at a small table covered with a dinosaur-themed tablecloth. Amelia spotted him first, excusing herself from a conversation with another mother to approach him. She wore a simple blue dress that brought out her eyes, her hair pulled back in a loose bun. She looked beautiful in a way his memory hadn't done justice. "You made it," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "Wouldn't have missed it," he replied, then gestured awkwardly with his packages. "I brought gifts. I hope that's okay. Of course, you can put them with the others." She pointed to a small side table already holding a modest pile of presents. Before he could move, the boys spotted him and came running over. "Mr. Harrington, you came to our party," Ethan exclaimed. "Mom said you were coming, but sometimes grown-ups say they'll come and then they're too busy," Oliver added matter-of-factly. "I wanted to be here," Jackson said, kneeling down to their level despite his expensive suit. "Happy birthday, boys. Did you bring presents?" Leo asked, eyeing the packages with undisguised interest. "Leo," Amelia admonished gently, "remember what we said about being polite?" "Sorry," Leo said, not looking particularly repentant. "Thank you for coming to our party, Mr. Harrington. Did you bring presents?" Jackson couldn't help laughing, a genuine sound that surprised even himself. "Yes, I did bring presents. But I think your mom probably has a plan for when you open them." "After cake," Amelia confirmed. "Speaking of which, I should check on it." As she headed to the kitchen, Jackson found himself surrounded by curious 5-year-olds, all asking questions about his car, his watch, and whether he knew any dinosaurs personally. "Dinosaurs lived millions of years ago," he explained to a particularly persistent boy. "So no one alive today has ever met one." "That's what I told him," Ethan said with the weary patience of someone who had explained this many times. "But Tyler doesn't believe me." Jackson was saved from further paleontological debate by Amelia's announcement that it was time for cake. The children scrambled to the table as she emerged from the kitchen carrying a homemade cake decorated with dinosaurs, rockets, and paintbrushes, one theme for each boy. As everyone sang "Happy Birthday," Jackson watched Amelia help the triplets blow out their candles, her face glowing with love and pride. He felt a sharp pang of regret for all the moments like this he had missed, all the birthdays and milestones he hadn't been there to witness. But mixed with the regret was something unexpected. Admiration. Amelia had done this on her own, created this warm, loving home, raised 3 remarkable boys without help or support. The woman he'd left behind, the one he'd dismissed as not understanding his ambition, had shown more strength and determination than he'd ever given her credit for. After cake came presents, and Jackson held his breath as the boys opened his gifts. Their excitement, Ethan's whoop of joy at the excavation kit, Oliver's wide-eyed wonder at the telescope, Leo's reverent handling of the art supplies, was worth every minute he'd spent selecting them. "These are very generous gifts," Amelia said quietly, appearing at his side as the boys showed their treasures to their friends. "I wanted to get them something special," Jackson replied. "I've missed 5 birthdays already." Something flickered in her eyes. Not quite forgiveness, but perhaps understanding. "They love them. Thank you. I got something for you too," he said, handing her the small, carefully wrapped package he'd been holding back. "It's not much, just, I remembered it was your favorite." Amelia unwrapped the book slowly, her expression softening as she recognized the title. "A first edition? Jackson, this is too much." "It's not enough," he said simply. "Not nearly enough." Their eyes met, and for a brief moment, the years between them seemed to fall away. Then Meredith appeared with a camera, asking to take photos of the boys with their gifts, and the moment passed. As the party wound down and guests began to leave, Jackson found himself helping Amelia clean up while Meredith entertained the boys in the living room. "They're incredible, Amelia," he said as they worked side by side in the small kitchen. "You've done an amazing job with them." "They make it easy," she replied. "They're good boys." "They're Harringtons," he said without thinking. "They should have my name." Amelia's hands stilled on the plate she was washing. "That's not a conversation for today, Jackson. You're right. I'm sorry." He passed her another plate. I want to be part of their lives. Whatever that looks like, however you think is best. I want to know them." She studied him for a long moment. "And what about your fiancée? How does she feel about you suddenly having 3 children?" "She's not my fiancée," Jackson clarified. "And she doesn't know yet. I canceled our dinner last night." "The dinner where you were going to propose?" Amelia guessed, surprising him again with her perception. "Yes," he admitted. "But that's not happening now." "Because of the boys?" "Because seeing you again, seeing what you've built here, seeing what I walked away from," he struggled to find the right words. "It's made me question everything." Amelia dried her hands on a dish towel, her expression guarded. "Jackson, I need to be very clear about something. I'm not the same woman you left 6 years ago. I won't put my life or my boys' lives on hold while you figure out what you want. If you want to be their father, I won't stand in your way. But don't confuse that with anything else." "I understand," he said, though the finality in her tone left an unexpected hollow feeling in his chest. "I just want a chance to know them, to be the father they deserve." After a moment, she nodded. "We can start with dinner next weekend. Something casual so they can get to know you better." "I'd like that," Jackson said, relief washing through him. "Thank you, Amelia." As he prepared to leave, the boys insisted on showing him their room, a small space with 3 beds that they decorated with their individual interests. Dinosaur posters above Ethan's bed, space-themed decals over Oliver's, and Leo's artwork proudly displayed on the wall by his pillow. "Will you come back soon?" Oliver asked as Jackson knelt to say goodbye. "Very soon," Jackson promised. "Your mom said I could take you all to dinner next weekend. Can we go in your big car?" Ethan asked excitedly. "If your mom says it's okay," Jackson replied, glancing at Amelia, who nodded with a small smile. "Are you our dad?" Leo asked suddenly, his perceptive gaze fixed on Jackson's face. The room went silent. Meredith, who had been hovering nearby, inhaled sharply. Amelia stepped forward, but Jackson gently raised a hand, asking for a moment. "Yes, Leo," he said, looking each boy in the eye. "I am your dad, and I'm very sorry I haven't been here before now. But if you and your brothers are okay with it, I'd really like to start being your dad now." The boys exchanged looks, having one of those silent conversations that only identical triplets could manage. Then Ethan, apparently the designated spokesman, nodded solemnly. "Okay, but you have to promise not to be too busy all the time. Mom says promises are important." "Your mom is right," Jackson said, his throat tight with emotion. "I promise I won't be too busy for you. Not ever again." As he left the apartment, the weight of that promise settled on his shoulders, not as a burden, but as a compass pointing toward a future he'd never imagined but suddenly wanted more than anything. Have you ever had to completely reimagine your future because of one unexpected moment? Share your story in the comments below. The week that followed was a blur of activity for Jackson. By day, he restructured his work schedule, delegating responsibilities he'd previously insisted on handling personally, much to the surprise of his executive team. By night, he researched everything from child development to co-parenting strategies, determined to approach fatherhood with the same thoroughness he applied to business acquisitions. On Monday morning, he'd called Vivian to explain the situation in person. They'd met at her sleek downtown office, the ring box sitting between them on her glass desk like an artifact from another lifetime. "Triplets," she'd repeated, her perfectly composed expression betraying only the slightest hint of surprise. "And you had no idea they existed?" "None," Jackson confirmed. "Amelia tried to tell me, but I made myself unreachable." Vivian had studied him thoughtfully. Unlike the dramatic scenes he'd half expected, she'd been remarkably pragmatic. "This changes everything, doesn't it?" "It has to," he'd admitted. "They're my sons. I've already missed 5 years of their lives. And the proposal?" She gestured to the ring box. "Would be unfair to you. I can't ask you to suddenly become a stepmother to 3 children. I'm just getting to know myself. And I can't promise that my focus won't shift dramatically in the coming months." To his surprise, Vivian had smiled, a genuine expression rarely seen on her usually composed face. "You know, Jackson, this is perhaps the most honest you've ever been with me." She'd pushed the ring box back toward him. "We made sense on paper, but I think we both know that's not enough for a lifetime." They'd parted as friends, perhaps closer in that moment of honesty than they'd been during their entire relationship. It had been a clean break, much like his divorce from Amelia, except this time, Jackson was acutely aware of what a clean break could cost. On Wednesday, he'd met with his lawyer to discuss legally establishing paternity and setting up trust funds for the boys. Richard had raised the question of custody. "Do you want to pursue joint legal custody?" the attorney had asked. "Given your resources, we could make a strong case." "No," Jackson had said firmly. "Amelia has been their only parent for 5 years. I'm not going to disrupt that with legal battles. I want to be in their lives, but on terms that work for everyone, especially the boys." Richard had seemed surprised but hadn't argued. Instead, they drafted a generous child support proposal that acknowledged the years of back support Amelia had never requested, along with provisions for the boys' education, health care, and future needs. By Friday, Jackson found himself standing outside a child psychologist's office, having scheduled a consultation on how best to integrate himself into his sons' lives without causing confusion or distress. The specialist had offered practical advice. Move at the children's pace, establish consistent routines, respect boundaries, and above all, keep promises. Children this age need reliability more than grand gestures. Dr. Winters had explained. A father who shows up consistently for small moments will build more trust than one who makes occasional spectacular appearances. Now, as Saturday evening approached, Jackson felt a nervousness he hadn't experienced since his company's IPO. He'd chosen a family-friendly restaurant with interactive games and activities, casual enough that the boys would feel comfortable, but private enough for conversation. He'd arrived early to secure a quiet corner booth and arrange small welcome gifts at each child's place. Nothing extravagant, just small dinosaur, space, and art-themed activity books to match their interests. When Thomas pulled the Bentley up to Amelia's apartment building, Jackson went to the door himself rather than waiting in the car. This wasn't a business pickup. This was him showing up for his family. Amelia answered his knock, looking lovely in simple jeans and a soft blue sweater. Behind her, the boys were a whirlwind of excitement, all talking at once about the fancy car and whether the restaurant would have chocolate milk. "You look nice," Jackson said, the words slipping out before he could consider them. "Thank you," Amelia replied, a hint of surprise in her eyes. "Boys, do you have your jackets? It's getting chilly out." The drive to the restaurant was filled with the triplets' chatter. They'd become noticeably more comfortable with Jackson over the past week, peppering him with questions about everything from his favorite color to whether he knew how to swim. "Dad, do you have a swimming pool?" Oliver asked, the word dad still new and wonderful to Jackson's ears. "I do at my apartment building," Jackson replied. "Maybe you could come swim sometime, if your mom says it's okay." "Can we, Mom?" Ethan asked immediately. Amelia smiled. "We'll see. Let's focus on dinner tonight." At the restaurant, the boys were delighted with their activity books, immediately diving into the puzzles and games while they waited for their food. Jackson had researched their favorite meals ahead of time, another detail that earned him an approving glance from Amelia. "You've done your homework," she observed quietly while the boys were distracted. "I want to get this right," he admitted. "They deserve that." Dinner progressed smoothly, the conversation flowing more easily than Jackson had dared hope. The boys were natural chatterboxes, filling any potential awkward silences with stories about school, friends, and their many adventures with Mommy and Aunt Mare. It was during dessert, ice cream sundaes, that the boys assembled themselves from a toppings bar, that Leo asked the question Jackson had been both expecting and dreading. "Dad, why didn't you live with us before? Didn't you want to?" The table went quiet. Even Ethan and Oliver, usually quick to jump in with their own questions, seemed to sense the importance of this moment. Jackson set down his spoon, giving the question the serious consideration it deserved. He'd prepared for this, consulting with Dr. Winters on age-appropriate honesty. "I didn't know about you boys," he said gently. "Your mom and I weren't together anymore when she found out she was going to have you, and I made some mistakes that made it hard for her to tell me." "What kind of mistakes?" Ethan asked, his brow furrowed in concentration. Jackson glanced at Amelia, who nodded slightly, giving him permission to continue. "I was very focused on my work," he explained. "So focused that I didn't make time for the important things like family. I thought my company was the most important thing in the world, and I was wrong. But now you know about us," Oliver pointed out pragmatically. "Now I know about you," Jackson agreed, "and I'm going to do everything I can to make up for the time I missed." "Are you and Mom going to live together now?" Leo asked, his perceptive gaze moving between the adults. Amelia stepped in smoothly. "No, sweetheart. Your dad and I will have separate homes. But we both love you very much, and we're going to work together to take care of you. Like Tyler's parents," Ethan said, nodding wisely. "They have 2 houses and Tyler gets 2 birthdays." Jackson couldn't help smiling at the child's perspective on divorce. "It's something like that. But I promise I'll be around a lot more now." The conversation moved on to lighter topics, but Jackson noticed Amelia watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Not quite approval, but perhaps a new respect for his honesty with the boys. After dinner, they took a short walk to a nearby park, where the boys burned off their ice cream energy on the playground while Jackson and Amelia sat on a bench watching them. "Thank you," Jackson said after a comfortable silence, "for tonight, for giving me this chance with them." "They're your sons too," Amelia replied, echoing his words from the birthday party. "They deserve to know you." "I've been thinking about what happens next," he said carefully. "I had my lawyer draw up some papers, not for custody," he added quickly, seeing her expression change. "Just child support, education funds, healthcare. Things I should have been providing all along." "We've managed fine," Amelia said, a hint of defensiveness in her tone. "I know you have. That's not the point." Jackson turned to face her directly. "Amelia, you've done an incredible job raising them on your own. But you shouldn't have had to. I want to do my part now, not because you need it, but because it's right." She was quiet for a moment, watching the boys chase each other around the playground. "I'll look at the papers," she finally said. "But I don't want the boys to think they're suddenly getting things because you showed up with money. The values I've taught them, working hard, appreciating what we have, finding joy in simple things, those matter to me." "They matter to me too," Jackson said, surprising himself with how deeply he meant it. "I don't want to change who they are or how you're raising them. I just want to make things easier where I can." As the evening drew to a close and they headed back to Amelia's apartment, Jackson felt a growing certainty that his life had irrevocably changed course. The ambition that had driven him for so long hadn't disappeared, but it had been tempered by something new, a desire to be worthy of the 3 small boys who had so quickly claimed his heart. Saying goodnight was difficult. The boys were reluctant to see him go, extracting promises for more outings, more stories, more time together. "When will we see you again?" Oliver asked, his small hand holding tightly to Jackson's. "How about I come over after school on Monday?" Jackson suggested, looking to Amelia for approval. "Maybe I could help with homework and stay for dinner?" "Can he, Mom?" the boys chorused. "That would be fine," Amelia agreed with a small smile. As the boys hugged him goodnight, still somewhat awkwardly, but with growing comfort, Jackson felt a surge of emotion unlike anything he'd experienced in the boardroom or with any business success. This, he realized, was what mattered. This was what he'd been missing while chasing wealth and status and power. "Thank you for tonight," Amelia said as she walked him to the door after the boys had gone to brush their teeth. "They had a wonderful time." "So did I," Jackson replied honestly. "More than I can say." There was a moment of awkward silence, both of them aware of the strange intimacy of co-parenting children while navigating their complicated history. "Amelia," Jackson began, then hesitated. "I know I have no right to ask this, but are you seeing anyone?" "The boys haven't mentioned anyone, but I wondered." She looked surprised by the question. "No, I'm not. Between work and raising triplets, dating hasn't exactly been a priority." "Of course," he said quickly. "I just wanted to make sure I wasn't complicating things with someone else in their lives." "There's no one else," she assured him. Then, with a hint of her old directness, "And you? What happened with Vivian?" "We ended things," Jackson said simply. "It was the right decision for both of us." Amelia nodded, accepting this without further comment. "Good night, Jackson. We'll see you Monday." As he walked back to his car, Jackson found himself thinking not about the boys for once, but about their mother. The Amelia he'd known 6 years ago had been warm, brilliant, and loving, but also somewhat in his shadow, trying to fit herself into the role of corporate wife. This new Amelia, confident, direct, fiercely protective of her children, was both familiar and startlingly different. And if he was being completely honest with himself, he found this version of her even more compelling than the woman he'd once married. The weeks that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Jackson came for dinner 3 times a week, gradually taking on more parental responsibilities, helping with homework, attending school events, even handling bedtime stories when Amelia needed to work late at the library. The boys flourished under the attention of both parents, their initial excitement about having a father settling into a secure confidence that Jackson would be there when he said he would. He never missed an appointment, never canceled a visit, never prioritized work over time with his sons. Sentinel Security's board of directors had been surprised by their CEO's sudden shift in priorities, but the company was stable enough now to function without his constant presence. Jackson still worked hard, but he left the office at reasonable hours and declined business trips that would take him away for more than a day or two. 1 month into this new arrangement, Jackson arrived for his regular Wednesday dinner to find Amelia looking stressed. Her phone pressed to her ear as she stirred something on the stove while simultaneously trying to help Ethan with a school project. "No, I understand," she was saying, her expression growing more concerned. "But there's no one else who can cover?" "I see. Yes, of course. I'll be there." She hung up with a sigh, then noticed Jackson in the doorway. "Oh, you're here. Sorry about that. Everything okay?" he asked, already moving to take over the stirring. "Not really. The library's short-staffed, and they need me to cover the evening shift. Meredith is out of town, and my backup sitter just canceled." She ran a hand through her hair in frustration. "I hate to ask, but could you stay with the boys tonight? It would be until about 9:30. "Of course," Jackson said immediately. "I'd be happy to." Relief washed over her face. "Thank you. Dinner's almost ready, and they've already started homework. Bedtime is 8:30, and they'll try to negotiate for later, but don't let them." "I've got this," he assured her. "Go get ready. We'll be fine." As Amelia rushed to change for work, Jackson felt a surge of pride that she trusted him enough to leave him alone with the boys. It was a small thing, perhaps, but it represented significant progress in their co-parenting relationship. That evening was a revelation. Without Amelia present, the boys looked to Jackson for guidance, comfort, and authority in a way they hadn't before. He helped them finish homework, supervised bath time, a chaotic affair involving more water on the floor than seemed physically possible, and settled them into bed with a story. "Dad," Leo asked sleepily as Jackson tucked the blanket around him. "Are you going to be here when we wake up?" The question caught him off guard. "Not tomorrow morning, buddy. I'll be at my apartment. But I'll see you on Friday for the school play." "But what if we need you in the middle of the night?" Oliver wondered from the next bed. "Mom is always here if we have bad dreams." Jackson considered this. "Well, your mom will be home before you go to sleep tonight. But if you ever need me when I'm not here, you can always call me. Anytime, day or night." "Promise?" Ethan asked, his eyes already drifting closed. "I promise," Jackson said firmly. "I'll always come when you need me." When Amelia returned home at 9:45, she found Jackson sitting at the kitchen table, a thoughtful expression on his face. "How did it go?" she asked, setting down her bag. "Were they good?" "They were perfect," he assured her. "But they asked me something that got me thinking." "Oh," she sat down across from him, curious. "They wanted to know if I'd be here in the morning, and what would happen if they needed me in the middle of the night." He met her gaze directly. "Amelia, I hate that I'm not here for them all the time. I hate that they have to wonder if I'll be around when they need me." She sighed softly. "That's the reality of co-parenting, Jackson. We live in separate homes. We have separate lives. It doesn't have to be that way," he said, the words coming out before he'd fully thought them through. I could get a place closer. Maybe in this neighborhood." Amelia looked surprised. "You'd move to Queens? Leave your penthouse?" "In a heartbeat," he said without hesitation. "For them." Something shifted in her expression then, a softening he hadn't seen directed at him in years. "You really have changed, haven't you?" "I'm trying to," he admitted. "Every day." The moments stretched between them, filled with unspoken history and new possibilities. Then Amelia stood, breaking the spell. "It's late," she said. "And you have an early meeting tomorrow, don't you?" "I do," Jackson acknowledged, rising as well. "But I meant what I said. I'm going to start looking at places nearby." As he left that night, Jackson felt a certainty growing within him. The past 6 weeks had shown him not just who his sons were, but who Amelia had become, and who he wanted to be for all of them. The question was whether the damage of the past could truly be repaired, or if some bridges, once burned, remained forever uncrossable. 6 months after that rainy evening at the bus stop, Jackson stood in the kitchen of his new home, a comfortable brownstone just 3 blocks from Amelia's apartment. The boys were spending their first weekend with him in the new place, their excitement at having rooms of their own at Dad's house, tempered only by their concern for their mother being alone. But who will make Mom breakfast? Ethan had worried as Jackson helped them pack overnight bags. "I think Mom can manage breakfast for one morning," Amelia had assured him with a smile. "Besides, I might enjoy the quiet." Now, as Jackson flipped pancakes shaped like dinosaurs, a skill he'd practiced diligently after discovering the boys' love for themed breakfast foods, he reflected on the remarkable journey of the past 6 months. The move to Queens had raised eyebrows among his social circle and business associates. The great Jackson Harrington, trading his Park Avenue penthouse for a brownstone in a middle-class neighborhood? But the decision had never felt like a sacrifice. If anything, The brownstone with its warm wooden floors and backyard garden felt more like a home than the sleek, impersonal penthouse ever had. "Dad, Oliver took my T-Rex." Ethan's indignant voice carried from the living room. "I just wanted to see if it would fit in the spaceship," Oliver defended. Jackson smiled to himself as he went to mediate the dispute. These ordinary moments of fatherhood had become the highlights of his days, replacing the adrenaline rush of closing deals or outmaneuvering competitors. "Gentlemen," he said, adopting the formal tone that always made the boys giggle, "perhaps we could find a diplomatic solution to this dinosaur spaceship crisis?" By the time Amelia arrived to pick up the boys after lunch, the crisis had been resolved with the creation of a Dino space exploration team that now occupied most of the living room floor. "Looks like you've been busy," she observed, taking in the elaborate construction of blocks, action figures, and household items repurposed as space equipment. "Mom, Dad helped us build a space station for dinosaurs," Leo explained excitedly. "And we had dinosaur pancakes for breakfast. Did you now?" Amelia smiled, meeting Jackson's eyes over the boys' heads. "Sounds like you had a wonderful time." "We did," Jackson confirmed, "though I think I need to work on my pancake flipping technique." The Stegosaurus was a bit abstract. "It looked more like a blob with spikes," Ethan informed his mother solemnly. "But it tasted good." Amelia laughed, the sound warming something in Jackson's chest. These moments of easy camaraderie had been growing more frequent between them, the sharp edges of their past gradually softening into something that, if not quite friendship, was at least a comfortable partnership. "Boys, why don't you go pack up your things?" Amelia suggested. "Give me a few minutes to talk to your dad." Once the triplets had raced upstairs to gather their belongings, Amelia turned to Jackson with a more serious expression. "I wanted to let you know that I've been offered a promotion at the library," she said. "Head of Children's Services. It would mean more responsibility, better pay, but also some evening events and occasional weekend work." "That's wonderful," Jackson said sincerely. "You deserve it." "Thank you." She hesitated. "The thing is, with the boys starting kindergarten in the fall and this new position, I've been thinking about our arrangement. If you're open to it, it might make sense for them to spend more time here. Maybe 2 or 3 nights a week, instead of just weekends." Jackson felt a surge of joy at the suggestion. "I'd love that. You know I would. But are you sure? I know how much you value your time with them." "I do," she acknowledged. "But I also value their relationship with you. And practically speaking, having you take more of the childcare responsibilities would help me balance everything." She smiled slightly. "Besides, they clearly enjoy their dinosaur pancakes. Even the abstract ones," Jackson agreed with a grin. "Amelia, whatever works best for you and the boys, I'm all in. You know that." She nodded, her expression softening. "I do know that now. It's taken time, but you've proven yourself, Jackson. You've been consistent, reliable, present. The boys adore you. And I adore them," he said simply. "They're the best thing that's ever happened to me, even if it took me far too long to realize it." Something unspoken passed between them then, a current of understanding that went beyond their roles as co-parents. Before either could acknowledge it, the boys thundered back downstairs, backpacks haphazardly stuffed with belongings. "All ready," Oliver announced proudly, though a sock was clearly hanging out of his bag. As Amelia helped the boys organize their things, Jackson found himself watching her. The patient way she showed them how to fold their clothes, the gentle firmness when Leo tried to smuggle an extra toy home, the laugh that came so easily now. The woman he'd married had been lovely, but this Amelia, strong, independent, completely herself, was extraordinary. The realization hit him with unexpected clarity. He was falling in love with her all over again, not with the memory of who she had been, but with the reality of who she had become. The question was whether she could ever feel the same way about him again, after everything that had happened between them. 1 year after the rainy evening at the bus stop, Jackson stood in his kitchen again. But this time he wasn't alone. Amelia moved around the space with familiar ease, putting finishing touches on the birthday cake they'd spent the afternoon decorating together. A complex creation featuring a space station inhabited by dinosaurs with art studios. "Do you think they'll like it?" she asked, adjusting a small fondant telescope. "They'll love it," Jackson assured her. "Though they might be more excited about the trampoline in the backyard." Amelia groaned. "I still can't believe I let you talk me into that. Our homeowner's insurance is going to skyrocket." "Worth it for the looks on their faces," he countered with a grin. She shook her head, but she was smiling too. "You're impossible. Yet you put up with me anyway," he pointed out, handing her the candles. "For the boy's sake," she replied, but the teasing light in her eyes told a different story. The past year had transformed their relationship in ways neither could have predicted. What had begun as a cautious co-parenting arrangement had gradually evolved into something deeper. As Jackson proved himself day after day, Amelia's walls had slowly come down. They'd begun spending time together even when the boys weren't present, first discussing parenting strategies over coffee, then sharing meals, then finding excuses to extend those moments. Their first real date, 6 months after Jackson's move to Queens, had been both awkward and wonderful, two people with a complex history rediscovering each other as the individuals they'd become. Jackson had taken her to a small bookshop cafe, remembering her love of intimate, literary spaces rather than the flashy restaurants he'd favored during their marriage. "No five-star chef? No sommelier?" she teased. "Who are you, and what have you done with Jackson Harrington?" "He grew up," Jackson had replied simply. Finally. Since then, they'd been moving forward with deliberate care, both acutely aware of what was at stake. The boys, initially confused by seeing their parents spending time together without them, had gradually accepted this new development with the adaptability of children. "Are you and Dad getting married again?" Leo had asked one evening, his perceptive gaze moving between them. "We're just spending time together right now," Amelia had explained carefully. "Getting to know each other again." "But you like each other," Ethan had stated matter-of-factly. "We can tell." Out of the mouths of babes, Jackson had thought, catching Amelia's eye across the dinner table. Now, as they put the finishing touches on the birthday preparations, Jackson felt the weight of the small box in his pocket. Not an engagement ring, he wasn't presumptuous enough to think they were ready for that step, but a gift that he hoped would convey what he'd come to feel over the past year. The birthday party was a joyful chaos of 6-year-olds, cake, presents, and the wildly popular trampoline. By the time the last guest had been picked up and the triplets had finally crashed from their sugar high, Jackson and Amelia were exhausted but content. "That went well," she said, collapsing onto the couch beside him. "Though I think we'll be finding cake crumbs for weeks." "Small price to pay," Jackson replied, putting his arm around her shoulders in a gesture that had become natural over the past months. "They had a great time." "They did," she agreed, leaning into him slightly. "You've given them so much, Jackson. Not just the material things, but your time, your attention, your love. It's transformed them." "They've transformed me," he said honestly. "You all have." Amelia looked up at him, her expression soft in the dimming evening light. "It's been quite a year, hasn't it?" "The best of my life," Jackson said. "Which reminds me." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small box. "I have something for you." Amelia's eyes widened. "Jackson, it's not what you think," he assured her quickly. "Just open it." Inside the box was a delicate silver bracelet with 6 small charms, 3 identical boy figures, a book, a key, and a bus. "The boys, obviously," he explained as she lifted it from the box. "The book for your love of literature and your work at the library. The key for the new beginning you gave me by letting me into their lives. And the bus for where you found us," she finished softly, running her finger over the tiny silver bus charm. "The moment that changed everything," he confirmed. "Amelia, I know we've been taking things slowly, and I respect that, but I want you to know how I feel." He took a deep breath. "I love you. Not the memory of who you were, but the reality of who you are now, the strong, incredible woman who rebuilt her life on her own terms, who raised our sons with such grace and wisdom." who gave me a second chance I probably didn't deserve. Amelia's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Jackson, you don't have to say anything, he assured her quickly. I just wanted you to know, whatever happens between us, however long it takes, I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. She was quiet for a long moment, looking down at the bracelet in her hands. Then she met his gaze with a certainty that took his breath away. I love you too, she said simply. I think part of me always did, even when I was so angry I couldn't see straight. But this isn't about holding on to the past. It's about who we are now, who we've become. She smiled, a full, radiant expression that made his heart skip. And I like who we are now, Jackson. I like us. He cupped her face gently, giving her every opportunity to pull away. When she didn't, he kissed her. Not with the passionate intensity of their early days, but with a deeper, steadier emotion built on understanding and respect. Does this mean you're getting married again? A small voice interrupted from the doorway. They broke apart to find all three boys watching them with varying expressions of curiosity and satisfaction. We thought you were asleep, Amelia said, her cheeks flushing slightly. We were thirsty, Oliver explained, though his innocent expression didn't quite ring true. Jackson exchanged an amused glance with Amelia before addressing the question. We haven't talked about getting married again. That's a big decision that grown-ups need to think about carefully. But you love each other? Ethan pointed out, as if this simplified everything. We do, Amelia confirmed, her hand finding Jackson's. And we love you boys more than anything. Right now, we're just happy being together as a family, whatever shape that takes. Can we have a group hug? Leo asked, already moving toward them. Soon all five of them were tangled together on the couch, the boys wedged between their parents in a knot of arms and laughter. As Jackson held his family close, he marveled at how completely his life had changed in a single year. Once, he had measured success in dollars and deals, in power and prestige. Now he measured it in moments like this. His son's laughter, Amelia's smile, the home they were building together not of marble and glass, but of trust and second chances. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn morning, Jackson stood under a canopy of golden leaves in the small garden behind his brownstone. Beside him, Ethan, Oliver, and Leo fidgeted in their matching suits, periodically checking the small boxes they held with solemn responsibility. Are the rings still there? Jackson asked them for the third time, his own nervousness making him forget he'd just checked a minute ago. Yes, Dad. They chorused with the patient tolerance of children dealing with an anxious adult. And you remember when to walk up? When the music changes, Oliver confirmed. We practiced 100 times. Only 7 times, Leo corrected precisely. But we know what to do. Jackson smiled, adjusting Leo's slightly crooked tie. I know you do. You guys are the best ring bearers any dad could ask for. The small gathering of guests, just family and close friends, turned as the music shifted to the processional they'd chosen. Not the traditional wedding march, but a string quartet's rendition of the first song they'd ever danced to, back when they were young and unaware of the journey ahead. And then Amelia appeared at the garden path, and Jackson forgot to breathe. She wore not white, but a soft blue dress that brought out her eyes, her hair loose around her shoulders the way he'd always loved it. Meredith walked beside her, no longer the protective sister standing guard, but a proud supporter of the path they'd chosen. As Amelia reached him, taking his hands in hers, Jackson felt a sense of rightness that transcended the moment. This wasn't the flashy society wedding he might once have envisioned. It was something far more precious. A thoughtful choice made by two people who had lost each other, found themselves, and then found their way back together, stronger for the journey. Dearly beloved, the officiant began. We are gathered here today not to begin a marriage, but to renew one that has been transformed through separation, growth, and rediscovery. The ceremony they designed together acknowledged both their past and their present, the mistakes made, the lessons learned, the forgiveness offered and accepted. When it came time for the rings, the boys stepped forward with perfect coordination, each presenting a small box. 3 rings, Amelia whispered, surprised. One from each of them, Jackson explained softly. They insisted. From Ethan came a band of white gold, simple and strong. From Oliver, a ring set with 3 small sapphires. And from Leo, an intricately engraved band that wound around the others, binding them together. They fit together, Amelia realized as Jackson slid them onto her finger. Just like us. A family puzzle, he confirmed. All the pieces finding their place. When they were pronounced husband and wife again, the boys were the first to cheer, rushing forward to be included in the embrace. As Jackson held his family close, he marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. 6 years ago, he had walked away from what truly mattered, convinced that success and achievement would fill the void. 1 year ago, a red traffic light and a rainy evening had given him a second chance he never expected and certainly hadn't earned. And now, surrounded by the love he'd almost lost forever, Jackson Harrington, billionaire CEO, father of triplets, husband once more to the woman who had seen the best in him even when he couldn't see it himself, finally understood the true measure of wealth. It wasn't in the company he'd built or the fortune he'd amassed. It wasn't in power or prestige or the perfect corporate image. It was in a modest garden in Queens, with 3 boys with his eyes and their mother's heart, and the extraordinary woman who had found the courage to let him try again. It was in second chances, hard-won wisdom, and the quiet miracle of finding your way home after being lost. If this story touched your heart, please hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that sometimes the most beautiful love stories are the ones that get a second chance.